So Mr. Belogas has tried to carry out some polls throughout the day and see opinions on different matters, but I think the one thing that we can probably all agree on is that shipping is undergoing a seismic change. And during this change, there's two aspects that we have to consider, and today technologies are coming in place, stricter regulations, automation, even artificial intelligence, and how it's affecting the industry. So I thought that another important aspect that we have to discuss, other than adapting to this change, is how to safeguard your business in this respect. So I'm going to talk about reputation strategy and the legal aspects of cybersecurity, GDPR, and crisis media handling. As when change is coming, you have to also make sure that you're safeguarding your business in alignment with adapting to it. So in safeguarding your business, policy is key. And Mrs. Burgos mentioned in the previous panel that we have to try and control the things that we can control, and this is one of the things that we can at least control and is more foreseeable. So the first thing that you have to be considering is, do you have a cybersecurity policy and contingency planning in place? And most of you will obviously answer yes, but is this cybersecurity policy, does it adhere to IMO guidelines? Is it being updated? Do your people know how to implement it? By January 2021, vessel operators will have to incorporate cyber risk in the safety management systems. So if you're not already updating or working on it, I think it's about time that you start looking into it. GDPR, a huge topic that came into the shipping industry. So it came into effect on May 25th, 2018. And some of the concerns that you have to have in mind is your GDPR strategy aligned with your day-to-day operations? So is it functional? Do you know what constitutes a breach in a shipping company? Have you tried, tested it? Are you ready to deal with this kind of a breach? So the impressive thing is that it came into effect end of May, and in October the first fines were implemented. And even though it was a small amount, if we may say, compared to what we were hearing about 2 million, etc., and it was 400,000 in Portugal, the interesting thing about it was that one of the main reasons that the fine was implemented was that on the day of the inspection at a clinical hospital that takes place, 985 physicians had access to clients' file, and on that particular day, only 296 active doctors were registered with the company. So applying it to our shipping industry, say if there's an inspection, and you've got your crewing department being audited, and you've got 30 people that are in the office, but the commissioner will see, or the team of the commissioner will see that 50 or 60 people have access to your database, that's a breach. Do they need access to this database? Do they need access when they're on annual leave, or maternity leave, or during travel? So all of these things you really have to take into consideration when drafting your policy. And lastly, does your policy cover media handling in a crisis? Because, as it was mentioned earlier today, nobody wants bad publicity, so it's another important factor that we have to consider. So whether it's a cyber attack or GDPR breach, or it's even an IMO detention, or anything that can see the public eye, you need to be prepared. And 95% of that battle comes down to culture, and it's in the mindset, basically. So, in defining the success mindset, you have to have in place a comprehensive policy and a legal strategy dealing with it. You must be clear and functional. If not, operationally, you will not be able to comply with the strategy. So if you've created a perfect policy that isn't aligned with the way that your business works, it's never going to work. You're going to be in breach all the time. And secondly, of course, training your staff. So the human element is your greatest risk. If provisions are not in your policy, you cannot really hold people accountable. Thus, you will assume the liability. So a very simple example that I usually give is that a client of mine was complaining that we have employees using Facebook all day long, and we want to give them a notice because during working hours they're using Facebook. So my first question was, does your policy say that they cannot use it? The answer was obviously, no, it doesn't, but it goes without saying. Nothing goes without saying. If your policy does not include it, then you cannot hold people accountable. If they don't understand your policy you have not trained them to understand your policy, you cannot hold them accountable. Same applies in all other aspects of shipping. And number 3, effective implementation. So you must ensure that policy and procedure is absolutely functional for the way that you do business. So there's no one model for all shipping companies. And lastly, which is quite vital, is reputation management. For one, no monetary value can really make up for reputation damage. And secondly, in an age where social media is the most powerful tool, it can really build or destroy your case in seconds. So even if you have the best lawyers dealing and building your case, if there's pictures on social media that go against you, and probably pictures maybe from your own seafarers, then they've built another case for the opponent. What your policies contain, how you act as an organization, and how your people are trained to act will have a significant effect on how legal liability is determined. Ensure also that you have a litigation strategy in place. So you need to make sure that you know when you're taking something to court and when you want to settle it out of court. So where it's more beneficial for you. Safeguarding your corporate image can strengthen your case or vice versa. So a few tips on each of these policies. In cybersecurity, you have to make sure that you have defined roles and responsibilities, so you know who addresses what in the event of a crisis. You have to continually monitor this process and make sure that it works and that it is performing in the way that it is designed to be performing. Clarity, keep it simple. Put in all words in it that are not understood by your people at any educational level will be a problem in implementing it. Detection provisions, so you have to make sure you're able to detect where there's a risk and where there's an attack. Contingency and recovery provisions to ensure the continuity of your business. Make sure you convene, train, and send out bulletins to your people, both ashore and on board. I cannot say this enough. But in this way, you can build the correct mindset and culture. GDPR policy, a lot up there, I know, obviously it's GDPR, we have to be a little bit more careful, but make sure you have a clear strategy again on what you share, the purpose, how it's shared, the duties during sharing, who can access it, and for all people, the data subjects to be aware of their rights at all times. You have to define where consent is required and make sure you have acquired it. You have to include provisions on how data is recorded exactly, so be transparent in how it's retained, for how long it's retained, etc. You have to include confidentiality and data management provisions that will also have to be reflected in any agreements you have with third parties, any communications, even email disclaimers, etc. Have clear breach response provisions that comply with GDPR 72-hour notice, and make sure you have tested it, because in an event of a breach, the last thing you want to be doing is testing your systems and seeing that there's a failure. Appoint a data protection officer, so while it's not mandatory by the law, it is strongly suggested, and define these duties in this policy, because you will have one point of contact for all of your employees. And how you will appoint the DPO, how they will supervise it, must be laid out in your policy. Create a stream of communications. So what we have to understand is that with these new regulations, they're all new, and they're coming into practice now, and we don't really know how it's going to be developed. So make sure your people know who to refer any questions they may have. On a case-to-case basis, we will be able to set out the policy more effectively. Conduct a training program. Again, you have to train your people. You have to explain to them the cost of failing or any breach, and embed in them the sense of responsibility about the data that they're handling. Build the correct mindset. 81% of data breaches is caused due to weak passwords. And coming on to media response policy, the process for making media inquiries must be, and how it is recorded, must be included in your media response policy. So keep track. Who has called, from where they have called, have you returned those calls? Because if there's an incident and you're not following up, that doesn't portray a good image to the outside on how your company is dealing with it. Next of kin calls, this is quite a tricky issue, and you have to set out a process, because if you've got another person calling in reception and they're devastated, claiming to be a next of kin, you really have to be able to swiftly establish whether they're actually a next of kin. It might be a pretending to be a next of kin. So you have to keep the balances between the human touch and being professional and not giving any data when not necessary. Include a press statement template. So in an event of the crisis, and once your emergency response team is conducted, the last thing you're going to be thinking about is how to use words selectively and make sure that it doesn't reflect any legal liabilities. So have a template in place that has been screened with your lawyers and with your team, and just amend it accordingly. Clearly define the spokesperson and the responsibilities. Clearly define the process of referring inquiries and information to the spokesperson. So how does your team convey to the transfer to your spokesperson? Bulletin must go out to sea first, so they really must know what they can and they cannot share in the event of an incident, because you don't want the reporters having stories with your people's pictures up there. Convey, train, send out bulletins, as I mentioned. Create an understanding of what is expected of your people. Create an understanding of why the reputation of this company that they work for is important and needs to be safeguarded. Beware, of course, of the power of media. They can do magic things, trust me. So they can misinterpret any words, acts, even lack of words and acts. Tip. Another important thing that I always advise our clients is to create a corporate image throughout the whole period, so not just in the event of a crisis. If you have any corporate social responsibility activities and initiatives, put them out there. So in the event of an incident, the only thing that they are finding would not be the crisis. Building, again, the correct mindset and culture. So, described as the most devastating cyber attack in history, Maersk, obviously. 574 offices in 130 countries around the globe. Maersk's network was so deeply corrupted that even IT was helpless for days. Cost of cyber attack was 300 million. This problem was of a magnitude never seen before in global trade, so it affected the whole global transport industry. 5 months later, Maersk's chair at the World Economic Forum applauded the heroic effort of his team in going into rescue operations. It took 10 days, he said, for the company to rebuild its entire network, 400 servers and 45,000 PCs. But full recovery took much longer than that. So since then, they are trying to make this a competitive advantage. However, he didn't say anything about security processes before the attack. So in concluding, basically what I'm trying to say, make sure you're proactive and not reactive, have clear and comprehensive policies and procedures in place, ensure their applicability and enforceability is functional for your business needs, mitigate risks, be prepared to mitigate damages for any scenario, set out a clear strategy, make sure that your strategy is your competitive advantage, preferably before an attack or a crisis happens. Make sure your people know what is expected of them. Use the media as a tool to master your strategy. So in the words of Warren Buffett, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you do things differently. And doing things differently means it's time for change. Thank you.